Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at something called phase changes, and we're going to learn why these changes are physical changes. Physical changes are something that you've probably learned about before, but we probably need a review. If you should need me, need some help, or have questions, please notice that my email address is on the screen. All right, so first off, phase changes. A phase change is really a simple idea. A phase change is simply when a substance moves from one state of matter to another. And it could be that it's moving from a solid to a liquid. It could mean that it's moving from a liquid to a solid or a gas to a liquid. Any of these are any of these changes of state, these are going to be called phase changes. Phase changes are physical changes. So let's take a look at the example on the screen. I mean, this is obviously a change of phase. We're changing state here. So when we have solid ice that melts into liquid water, this is a very simple example of a phase change. This is one that we're all familiar with. And so notice that we have a solid that is melting into a liquid. That's what makes it a phase change. All phase changes are physical changes. So when we say something is a physical change, what does that mean? So there are two types of changes. We have chemical changes and we also have physical changes. Um, we won't talk a lot about chemical changes, but let's just at least look at some examples. So fire or combustion is an example of a chemical change. Rotting, anytime you have a piece of fruit or milk spoiling, that is an example of a chemical change. Rusting is an example of a chemical change, and your body actually performs a chemical change on the food that you digest. Okay, so a chemical change is simply a change where the identity of the substance changes. In other words, before the change, we would have one type of substance. After the change, we would have a new type of substance. Okay, let's compare that to these examples of physical changes. So physical changes are things like melting. Like here we have some ice cream that is melting. Here we have some paper that has been shredded. This is an example of a physical change. Here we have some soup or some water that's boiling. And here we have some wood that has been chopped. Okay. So a physical change, which is of course different than a chemical change, is a change where the appearance of the substance changes. So in other words, the substance is going to look different after the change, but we're still going to have the same type of substance. So just because we change this soup by having it come to a boil, it's still soup. We haven't created a new substance. Same thing. We can chop this wood and very clearly it has changed. But when we're finished chopping it, we still have wood. Shredding paper. We've obviously changed it, but in the end, we just have paper in smaller bits, but it's still paper. Okay. So a chemical change is where the identity of the substance is going to change. Physical change is where only the appearance of the substance changes. So let's take a look at a very specific example of a chemical change. Okay, so remember, we are only changing the identity, and one of the keys is for a chemical change, a new substance is formed during the change. This is a change that I believe many of you may be familiar with. If we take and we combine baking soda and vinegar, if we were to combine these two chemicals, this is going to produce a chemical change. Another term for a chemical change is a chemical reaction. And so, really, during this chemical change, we're going to have this baking soda, which is really something called sodium bicarbonate. And here we can see the chemical formula for sodium bicarbonate, one molecule of it. And down here's what one molecule of sodium bicarbonate looks like. And then remember, we're also combining this with vinegar. So when vinegar is really called acetic acid, here is the chemical formula for vinegar. And this is what one molecule of acetic acid would look like. So when we combine these two chemicals, we're going to get a chemical change. And one of the things that happens is we get copious amounts. We get a lot of bubbles. We get fizzing. Okay. Fizzing is one of the signs that a chemical change is occurring. And this is indeed producing some new materials. So remember, a new substance has to be formed during the change. When we combine the baking soda and vinegar, we end up with something called sodium acetate. We also end up with a new substance. water that wasn't there before, right? So in the container, we're going to have water and we're going to produce carbon dioxide gas. The fizzing that we see here is an example of the carbon dioxide gas being created, okay? So what makes this a chemical change? Because we had some new substances that were formed, right? So we had carbon dioxide, water, and sodium acetate that were formed during this change. This is a good example of a chemical change. So chemical changes are happening all around us all the time. We will not study them a ton. The thing that you need to remember is that during this type of change, a new substance is formed by the change. Many of these chemical changes are permanent, which means we can't reverse them. Once this chemical change happens, we can't go back and put things back together, so to speak. Okay? All right. Now, a physical change, on the other hand, remember we said this is a change where no new substance is formed. Only the appearance of the substance changes. So we have the same substance exists after the change. No new substance is formed. So here we have some liquid water that is very quickly being changed into solid ice. Okay, so this is a phase change. Remember, we said all phase changes are physical changes. And so we can see here that the water is just turning into it. We have liquid turning into solid, clearly a phase change. How do we know that this is a physical change? Well, because when we look after the change, when we look at the substance, do we have the same thing? Yes. Ice is still water, good old H2O. That's its chemical formula. We did not create anything new with this. All phase changes are physical changes because we only change the appearance. We don't get something new. All right, so there are lots of examples of physical changes. The key thing for you to keep in mind is some physical changes are temporary, like all phase changes are temporary changes. You know, we can melt ice into water. That's a phase change. But then we can also refreeze that liquid water back into ice. So that is, you know, these are some of these physical changes are very much reversible. A physical change only is a change in appearance. We do not have a new substance formed. Breaking a glass, shredding paper, folding paper, melting ice, any of these down here in this big list, these are good examples of physical changes. So guys, um, I think I think that's going to cover us for this video, and we'll talk more about phase changes in the next video. Have a great day.